Our next speaker is my friend Billy Mzenga. And just to give you a little bit of information about Billy, married last July to Megan, now Mzenga, who was a LDI intern here at Hope. Billy grew up in Woodbury. His mom and dad still live there with his little brother who's a senior in high school. And he also has an older brother who lives in Minneapolis. Billy works at Cargill and Hopkins, has been coming to Hope for a little over 5 years, been involved in a small group and Men of Hope, among other things. Billy also has a pretty awesome blog, 5 billion stories, right, Billy? 7. I needed to learn how many people are on the planet, guys. 7 billion stories. And really, Billy's blog just shares people's stories. And he does some writing, but he also just finds people's unique look on life and takes the opportunity to share that. So you guys give Billy a warm welcome as he comes up.
Am I on? I am? Oh, all right, cool. All right, and this light's bright here. All right, my name is Billy, as Ben said, and like he said, he took my introduction for me. I live in Minneapolis, I work at Cargill, and I've been attending Hope for about 5 years now. When I was originally asked to speak at this event, I was kind of like confused. I was like, what am I going to tell these people? I don't really know what to say. I've written a little bit about this stuff, and I've thought a lot about it, but I've never spoken in front of people about race and the gospel and whatnot. But I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to kind of get stretched and kind of get out of my comfort zone and think about and engage a conversation that I've been wanting to have in real life for a long time, especially here. Because I wondered, like, what do people at Hope think about the pain and suffering and fear of communities of color in Minneapolis and throughout the state and the country. I know that here we have a lot of good theology, and there's a lot of really good programs for here, and we're good at serving the people here and serving people outside. But I just wondered how do the people here feel about the suffering that people in this community feel? I think it'd be important for me to provide a little context on who I am. I was born in Kenya. I came here when I was 3 years old. I lived in Falcon Heights, Minnesota for 8 years. Then I moved to Woodbury before I went to college in Minneapolis at Augsburg College. In Woodbury, so I would say Woodbury is where my formative years were. Kind of where you go to high school is kind of like where you say, I'm from there. So I would say I'm a Woodburyan to some extent. And Woodbury was not perfect, and it certainly was not diverse, but I had a really good upbringing there. It was a good community, and had a lot of good experience, got a good education and whatnot. And you can ask Megan, I'm always raving about how much I love Woodbury. Woodbury is a good place, blah, blah, blah. And most of my friends were white because the community is like 85% white or something like that. So most of my community was white. And I grew up going to a Lutheran church. So that means I was baptized when I was young. I got my first communion. I went through confirmation. And so, my experience, I don't know how many people here are Lutheran, but or grew up Lutheran anyways. My experience was similar to a lot of the people in my community, regardless of the fact that my church was I think we were one of 2 black families in our whole church. So because I grew up in that environment, I would say I feel safe in a white space because it's my experience has been primarily in white spaces, if you will. And that's part of the why I feel safe here to some extent. Because this is a relatively white setting, white space, but it's all I've known. So it wasn't out of the ordinary for me. All right, here we go. A couple months ago, I read this article by an author named Ta-Nehisi Coates. He's an author, he's a writer for The Atlantic, and he interviewed Barack Obama as the final days of his presidency were winding down. And in his interview, he quoted Obama, or Obama said this. He said, "There's no doubt that as a mixed child, the child of an African and a white woman who was very close to white grandparents who came from Kansas, the working assumption that white people would not treat me right or give me an opportunity or judge me on the basis of merit or less was less embedded in my psyche the same way it was with Michelle, with his wife Michelle." And I could relate to that. In case you can't tell, I'm not mixed race. I am dark as all get up. But I could relate to the point where my working assumption was never that white people would mistreat me or treat me less than because of the way I look. And that was not the same for all, especially older black people I encountered. There was a lot more skepticism of do they really like you, or are they just treating you that way? That was more my experience from older people. And I would get annoyed by it because I'm like, no, they're just my friends. You don't need to, act like they're mistreating me. I trust them, they're my friends, whatever. But there was an incident the summer after my freshman year that kind of changed that, or kind of challenged that a little bit. Freshman year was over, summer had just started, and people were kind of getting back to Woodbury or whatever. And I went to a bonfire with some friends. Or with one friend, my friend Eddie, who is Latino, but he looks really white, you couldn't tell he was Latino. And so we go to this bonfire, and everyone there is white except for me and him, I guess. So we get there, and there's a whole bunch of people, seeing people from high school again. It was fun or whatever. And there were some adults there, some parents there as well. And probably 5 minutes into the event, or to the bonfire or whatever, one of my friends from high school was telling a joke, and there's a group of people surrounded him, and parents and kids, and he's telling a joke. And I don't know what the joke was, but all I heard was Obama, and I heard nigger. That's all I heard. And then I heard an uproar of laughter. Parents, kids, all of them were there. So I turned to Eddie, I said, I think that's my cue that I'm supposed to leave, I'm not supposed to be here. And so one of my friends who was there, he's like, no, man, he was just kidding. I said, it's not funny to me. Let's go. So we left. And the guy so we're getting in the car and we're leaving, and the guy who said the joke came out and he was profusely apologizing, saying, I'm not racist, I'm sorry, I said the joke, or whatever. And so I said, whatever, it's fine, and then I left. And the shocking thing to me was that I never thought I would hear those words come out of that kid's mouth. Never thought I would hear that kind of joke come out of his mouth. And what was also more shocking was the parents that were there. They were laughing too. I was like, wow, I just never in my mind would imagine that these people would say that kind of thing or joke in that kind of way. And so that had two impacts on me. It made me think, okay, if Barack Obama, the president of the United States, Ivy League educated, if he can still be reduced to that word, what does that mean about me? I'm just some dude from Woodbury or whatever. I'm just so what does that say about me or anybody else? So what does that say about me? And how do they talk about me when I'm not there? And the second thing it did to me was it made me think that maybe this is how white people talk about black people when black people aren't there. Because he didn't know I was there, I don't think. I assume he didn't know I was there. It was dark or whatever, and so I was just like, maybe this is what being a fly on the wall is. Maybe this is how the conversation is. So I think that kind of impacted my perception of people's kindness. It made me feel are you really being kind to me? Do you really like me? What do you actually think about me? So it impacted me deeply. Now, I wouldn't say I walk around perpetually suspicious of white people. That would be weird if I'm here right now. It would be and it would be irrational and it would be exhausting. But that was definitely a damaging experience for me. And it made me skeptical of people's kindness and the way they speak to me. I went to a talk, Van Jones, you've probably seen him on CNN or whatever. Megan knows that he's my man crush. I just think he's a really smart guy or whatever. Politics aside. But when I listened to him speak at the U of M a couple months ago. He came and he spoke before the election. And he talked a lot about how we live in a hierarchical society. So there's people who are in positions of power and people who are positions lower. And he talked about how the people in different contexts, people on top have blind spots, and people below have sore spots. So he gave a couple examples, and I'll share a couple of them. So if someone says, if we think about everyone here, and you look at the people who are right-handed, if I ask you, what is it like to be right-handed in society? I'm assuming you're not going to have much to say. I don't know, it's just I'm right-handed, like life is normal for me. But if you ask someone, what is it like to be left-handed? I know my little brother's left-handed. You'll know that growing up, when you wrote with a pencil, you had to avoid getting lead on your finger and whatnot. Or you also know that scissors weren't made for you. They're right-handed scissors. Scissors are made for right-handed people. So society in general, was made to accommodate right-handed people. Another example would be for men. If you're a man, you're getting ready, you want to go out to drinks or whatever with your friends, you're thinking about where you want to go and what you want to do. If you're getting ready, you're thinking about, hey, let's go to this place, so let's go to that place. And women, if you're a woman, and if I get this wrong, women, don't yell at me now, yell at me later. You're thinking about, what you're wearing. You're thinking about making sure your makeup is on fleek. But you're also thinking about, what does my dress communicate to the people of the opposite sex? That's something I've never thought about. I've never thought about what I'm wearing is communicating to the opposite sex ever when I was getting ready to go out with my friends. And then another one would be, if I was to ask you, what is it like to be white at Hope Community Church? I'm assuming there wouldn't be much to say, because it's just I don't know. I'm white and I go to Hope. I don't know. But what is it like to be black, to go to Hope? And I think I'm qualified to answer that question. And I think one of the things that I would say, there's two things. One is that I can never quite assume that things that impact me, not only as a black man, but also as an immigrant, will be felt by anyone else here, things that impact people like me. I can never know it'll be acknowledged in front of the church. And another thing is, I have never seen anyone that looks like me on this stage before, whether it's announcing or anything. I haven't seen anyone so it feels that I feel separate then. I mean, not in a bad way, obviously, I've been here for 5 years, but I feel separate then in the sense that or lack of representation, if you will. So last summer, when things got a little crazy, Philando Castile was the main thing that impacted me, I would say. I was on my honeymoon with Megan, and that's kind of when that happened. As that happened and that whole situation was kind of blowing up here in the Twin Cities, I started to question my place here a little bit. It's not like nothing was said about it or that it wasn't brought up in a sermon or whatever. I actually remember Steve bringing it up in a sermon. But it just felt kind of separate then, to me. It kind of felt like it was happening far away. It didn't feel necessarily like it was so close to home. And like I said, I grew up in Falcon Heights, and Philando Castile was shot on Larpenteur and Fry. In 6th grade, I lived on Albert and Larpenteur. So really close to home. That really hit home. And as I was actually preparing for this, I realized something that in 6th grade, we had moved to where we were living there, and I wanted to go to a different elementary school that I'd been going through K through 5, because I didn't want to go to the elementary school right over there. So actually the bus picked me up on Larpenteur and Fry, my school bus every single day. So that was wow, this is, all this other stuff that's been happening, all these other shootings that we'd heard involving police, this is literally where the bus picked me up when I was in 6th grade. So I just felt like my white Christian friends, their response was relatively tempered or just kind of confused, what's going on? Why is this happening? Has this always been happening? It was more confusion, where my black Christian friends, it was more lamentation and sorrow and feeling of why would I have to explain my sorrow to you if you can see it? there's a video of this scene, and like this, why do I have to explain my sorrow to you? Last week, me and Nikki went to go visit this young woman who I grew up with, actually, who was really involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. And she was explaining how after, I think it was after Philando Castile or Jamar Clark, one of them, she went to her church. And after that happened, things were obviously blowing up, and there was not one mention of it at church. And it was so damaging to her that she didn't come back to that church ever again. And it kind of reminded me of Lecrae's song that he recently came out with, because he shared about how, a quote from one of his songs is, "I spoke my mind and I got attacked for it. Thought these people had my back, boy. They're telling me I asked for it. I guess I'm just another black boy. Then they killed Tamir Rice, and they just went on with their life. They're telling me to shut up talking about it, like I should just talk about Christ." So like for her, she was talking about how like she felt like, okay, there's all these like Christian lingo we're talking about, but like what does that mean for me when I feel like people that are like me are being killed and there's no justification for it? And so around the time of Philando Castile, me and Megan started to kind of think about what we wanted to do for in terms of our faith, because it felt like there's this huge thing happening in this city and in society, and we felt really safe here, but we didn't want to feel safe. We wanted to feel challenged, and we wanted to feel as if we could be Jesus' hands and feet for people who are suffering and hurting. And so, to be completely honest with you, the fact that Megan was working every Sunday kept us here. Because you can't really go looking for different churches or whatever if you can't go to church on Sunday. So like that, the fact that she was working Sunday kept us here and kept us here. And the more I reflected and prayed about it, I realized that God made it clear to me that there's no better place for me to have this conversation than right here. I needed to have it here because why would I go to somewhere where the suffering is already acute and the conversation is already flowing when I can be part of starting the conversation here? And given my background and my experiences, I might have something to illuminate to people here, despite the fact that I feel a little bit imperfect because my experience is a Woodbury experience, which is not necessarily, it's not marginalized in the same way. I don't come from a marginalized community. So I reached out to Core and talked to Ben a little bit about what we wanted to do to have this conversation here. And so here I am. I went to a Men of Hope event after the 2016 election, and we were reflecting, obviously, on the election. And one of the verses we kind of talked about was Romans 13, 1 and 2. And it said, "Let everyone be subject of governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that existed have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves." So my thoughts on that, I just had a really visceral reaction to that verse that day. I just remember feeling like, wow, I don't know what to do with that verse. Because like as African Americans in this society, obviously, if they remained subject to governing authorities, there'd still be slavery. And if, as an African, I know that if African countries had remained subject to governing authorities, those countries would still be colonized. And I also know that as a black man in an interracial marriage, if the Loving family hadn't gone to the Supreme Court and made interracial marriage legal in the whole United States less than 50 years ago, I couldn't marry Megan legally in the United States, or that wouldn't be allowed. So like a simple verse like that carries all this baggage for different kinds of people depending on your context and who you are. Last week, I came to Hope here we did a marriage seminar. And he was talking about marriage, but one of the things that Matt Chandler talked about was, what's your long game? Like, what is the long game? And so that's kind of what I was thinking about here. In 2027, 10 years from now, what does Hope want to say they did in 2017? When their black neighbors were saying, I feel like the criminal justice system doesn't work for me. Or when their Native American neighbors were saying, please don't allow this company to drill in my land because we need water to survive. Or our immigrant neighbors said, I live in constant fear that immigration is going to come and rip apart my family. What will Hope say 10 years from now when they look back on 2017? I had a conversation with some people here during a Sunday school class, and I was just talking about some practicalities on how to engage this conversation. And I think I'll just share a couple of them. I think the one thing that we can do is just continue to have a conversation. I think that's kind of what this is kind of springboarding to, and it's going to continue with several more events. And I think also another thing is intentionality. I don't know if Bart's here. I don't know if you remember where Bart is. I know, I saw him earlier today. Oh, okay, I don't see him. It's too bright. And I remember when I had talked to him about this, he mentioned that he wakes up and all his wife and his kids are white. And he goes to work and everyone he works with is white. He goes to church. He goes to church with his wife. He's like, I don't really know how to find diverse people in my life because it just doesn't happen naturally. So you have to seek it out. And I think that that's important to try and seek out opportunities to have that conversations about people who see the world differently than you and have different experiences than you. And I know Rob will appreciate this. He also always sends out these emails about different ministries in the city. So I know Urban Ventures. I know a little bit about it, and I would suggest maybe looking into something like that. It's a faith-based organization that allows you to go into these communities, meet people, and learn about what their experiences are. Hope Academy, I know, is another organization Hope works with, which works in a predominantly in a predominantly black or Muslim community, and also opportunity for people to interact with people who have different experiences than you. An organization that was really instrumental to me becoming a believer was Young Life. I went to Woodbury Young Life, but I volunteered at South Minneapolis Young Life, and I would definitely encourage that too. It's also a faith-based organization to kind of work at. So the point is just engaging, finding ways to be intentional about interacting with people who have different experiences than you that can challenge you to grow in your faith. And I think that's how we can be the hands and feet of Christ in this community. So I think one thing that I'll wrap it up on is that this last couple years have kind of shown the amount of difference, or like there's been obviously a lot of, you can see the separation between races and along different lines in our society. And even in the church, we can still talk about it. 50 years after segregation in schools was illegal, you can still talk about the white church and the black church. So how can we bridge that gap, And I think the fact that we can see the differences so clearly in this relatively polarized time is an opportunity to engage the conversation. And so in that way, I think that's a silver lining, and I hope that we can do that here, and that you can do that in your communities and at your workplace. So I will leave you with that, and I'm done.